Part 325. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3249. Zhenggu was very puzzled. It's good for the imperial physician's office to open pharmacies in various provinces. Why should there be opposition within the imperial physician's office? Zhou Man thought for a while and then said, because now the pharmacy is the most profitable place in the imperial physician's office other than buying medicinal materials. No, it even makes more money than buying medicinal materials. According to Xiao Yuan Zheng, this year, the pharmacy changed its head office, and even your uncle Zheng Tai competed. Zhenggu. Zhou Man waved his hand and said, don't worry about Shijing, add 2 more bills for money, and I will discuss it with the imperial physician's office. Even if it is not possible to open a pharmacy in each road, I will give the finished medicine prescription to the local medical office first. Make some money for medicines. Zhenggu shook his head and said, if they even stop them from opening pharmacies, it's even more impossible for them to agree to decentralize the prescriptions. You must know that the pharmacies live on the prescriptions. Zhou Man pondered, frowned, and said, it seems that just writing a letter is not enough, and there are 2 more explanations. Zhou Man looked at the letter in his hand thoughtfully, got up with the letter and went to the office. I'll go write the letter and write the essay. The reply to Mingda was included in the booklet sent back to Beijing. Because Zhou Man wrote quickly, he gave the reply letter and the booklet the next day, so the guard who came to deliver the letter from the princess mansion returned with the reply letter and the booklet. After reading the letter, Mingda personally sent the book to the imperial hospital. She said righteously to Xiao Yuan, who had never been able to make a decision, in the civil and military affairs of the Manchu dynasty, if you talk about the holy face, Xiao Yuan is the most common person, and it is me and I, even the prince and the elder brother can't match, so the mother and the queen can compare with Xiao Yuan Zheng. Since there is something incomprehensible in the imperial physician's office, Xiao Yuan Zheng can't make up his mind. Why not ask the father and emperor to make a decision? Zhou Man said that the imperial physician department and the court officials had some interests in mind, so the establishment of pharmacies in various Taoist schools has always been comparable, but the emperors are different. From the emperor's point of view, he only needs to consider whether it is beneficial to the Dajin society, the people of Dajin and the royal family. Zhou Man imagined for a moment that in addition to competing for some of the royal family's interests when opening a pharmacy, he would definitely agree with the emperor's temperament for the other 2. Now that the imperial physician's office can't make a decision, Xiamen has been pressing her book to wait for the imperial physician's office to make a decision. Can you wait for the approval after the year of the monkey? Mingda took out a booklet and gave it to Xiao Yuan Zheng, saying, this is the booklet attached to Zhou Man's letter to me. She asked me to deliver it to Xiao Yuan Zheng. Xiao Yuan took it and started to look at it. It explained in detail the necessity of establishing pharmacies in various provinces and the difficulties in the development of medical offices in various places. Xiao Yuan was having a headache. This document is similar to the previous one, but it is more detailed and the writing is better. But he is an imperial physician, so he doesn't look at literary style, only content. This booklet was obviously not written for him, but for the princes in the court. Xiao Yuan was closing the booklet, and saluted Princess Mingda. I have received it, thank you Princess for your suggestion. Mingda said with a smile, Xiao Yuan Zheng is being polite, and this palace also has something to ask Yuan Zheng. Xiao Yuan Zheng looked at Mingda in surprise, looked at her expression, and said hesitantly, the princess looks fine, she doesn't look sick. Mingda, it's not sick. The hospital also knows that Bengong is going to open a women's school in the capital, because it is the first time to run a school, and the identities and basics of the students admitted are very different. This is somewhat similar to the imperial physician's office. So Bengong wants to go to the imperial physician's office to get scriptures. Zhou Man's reply to Mingda said directly, if you want to know what running a school is like, just go to the academy and take a look. Qiaozijian, the private schools in Beijing, and the Imperial Physician's Office, Zhou Man said, especially the Imperial Physician's Office, because there are not only male students, but also female students. Among these students, some of them were sent by the Imperial Medical Insurance, and some countries sent them to exchange. There are also some medical students who have passed the exam, as well as servants sent by various schools for training. Now there are even some scholars who want to take the shortcut of the Imperial Physician Office. Their identities can be described as varied. To say that the college with the most diverse students is the only one in the world. I'm afraid no college can compare to the Imperial Physician's Office. If you want to know what it's like to run a school, just go in and experience it for a while, or be a gentleman yourself, or be a steward. In less than a month, you'll know what to expect. Regarding her and the Crown Princess concerns, Zhou Man's suggestion was the same as Bai Erlang's first half. Emotions are cultivated. It doesn't matter what kind of students they are. If they study together for 3 or 2 years, even if they can't become best friends, they should at least have classmate friendship. Zhou Man said, this is not only human nature, and it should be taught in school. After 3 or 2 years, students should also grow up and know that they can think. At this time, courses can be appropriately added. For this move, you can refer to the various schools and the Imperial College. Zhou Man said, the teaching of the colleges and the Imperial College is also the same. It's more and more every year, and in the process of adding subjects, not only the gentlemen have an understanding of the students' preferences, but the students also have a preliminary judgment on their own hobbies and future aspirations. At this time, it is recommended that you use the credit system to assess students. Credits are set for each course. College students who have completed the first 2 steps can choose courses according to their own goals. As long as the credits of the courses are reached, they can graduate and leave. Actually, this is somewhat similar to the curriculum in the Imperial College. Back then, the curriculum in our Imperial Physician Office was based on the Imperial College, but it was changed according to our own circumstances. Zhou Man said, the so-called change is inseparable from the original, and the Imperial College is the one of them is zone, so I don't recommend you to study the credit system and subject system of our Imperial Physician Office, you just need to refer to the Qiaozijian. If you are confused, ask Kong Jiju. Although Kong Jiju has always been serious, it is only an appearance. Beneath his serious appearance is a soft heart. No matter who asks a question, he will answer all questions, except for our family. Mr. Zhuang, I have never seen any gentleman who has the patience to sacrifice wine. But he also has a problem, that is, he likes to talk briefly, and he likes to say it only once, and he will be irritable if he doesn't understand it once, so don't bring by when you go, he will be very happy to talk to smart people, and a little clumsy. Students who speak can't help but get angry. Because of this exhortation, Mingda entered the palace by herself today, and after delivering the book to Xiao Yuanzheng in person, she turned around and went to the East Palace. Today, Kong Jiju is not in Qiaozijian, but in Chongguan Hall. Xiao Yuan watched Mingda leave, looked down at the book in his hand, and had a headache. Zhou Man will really give him a problem. Although she is not in the capital, she has basically been involved in the development of the Imperial Physician's Office in recent years. Every time there is a change in the Imperial Physician's Office, there is her shadow. Xiao Yuan was thinking of Lord Luo, who is now more and more prestige in the Imperial Physician Office. He squeezed the book in his hand, gritted his teeth, and turned to go to the Taiji Hall. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3250. What Princess Mingda said is right. There is no one who can meet the holy face more easily than Xiao Yuan. He regularly sees every other day, occasionally every day. Xiao Yuan was walking to the Tai Chi Hall to ask for a meeting. The little waiter hurriedly said, Your Majesty is seeing Master Na Luo Er, Xiao Yuan is waiting, Our family will report back. Xiao Yuanzhang frowned slightly, lowered his voice and asked, "Has your majesty taken the medicine pill again?" How dare the little maid to answer such a question, and hurriedly entered the hall without saying a word. Xiao Yuanzhang frowned, his face became serious, and he pinched the folds in his sleeves. Originally, he only had 5% of his mind, so he would not be able to follow the fate, but now that he has put a lot of thought into it, this must be done. After a while, the little servant came over and asked Xiao Yuanzhang to enter the hall. Xiao Yuan was entering with his servants, and the emperor was sitting face to face with a monk with white eyebrows and white hair. Although he had only been in the palace for less than half a year, Xiao Yuanzhang disliked this person very much and was very wary. However, he has served in the imperial court for more than 10 years, and his superficial skills are not bad, even better than that of the court officials. He does not have the wisdom and eloquence of Begwan, but in terms of restrained expression and no emotion, I am afraid that no one in the civil and military of the Manchu dynasty can match him. Xiao Yuan was entering, and he respectfully saluted and said, "Your Majesty, this minister is here to ask your Majesty's pulse." The emperor smiled and said, "Didn't you just ask for a pulse yesterday?" Xiao Yuan said, "Looking at His Majesty's pulse yesterday, there seems to be a fever in the body, but it is not serious, but at this time the seasons are changing, and I am worried, so I want to ask for a pulse every day." The emperor smiled and stretched out his hand, "Just right, I just took the Bulao Dan, how is my pulse?" Xiao Yuanzhang glanced at the monk calmly, replied yes with a smile, stepped forward and took the emperor's hand on his knees, closing his eyes slightly to feel the pulse. After a long time, Xiao Yuan was withdrawing his hand, and smiled with the emperor, "Your Majesty's pulse looks stronger, but the heat in the body is also heavier. After all, this minister is a normal doctor, so he can't get more pulses." The emperor thought it was boring. "You always say that every time you finish taking Bulao Dan, you are already the best imperial physician in my court, you can't figure it out, who can figure it out?" Xiao Yuanzhang said with a smile, "Your Majesty, isn't there a genius doctor in the court?" "You forgot, she is the reincarnation of Taibei." "Emperor." He looked at Xiao Yuanzhang helplessly. "Others don't know how Zhou Manzhou Taibei's name came from. Can they both know? Wasn't he the one who asked Bai Er to write the book design?" Xiao Yuanzhang said with a smile, "Although this folk rumor is exaggerated, your Majesty knows that Master Zhou's medical skills are indeed good, and when she was still in Beijing, she was on par with the ministers, and now she has gone out to practice for 5 years, I am afraid that medical skills will be higher." The emperor's heart moved slightly. "I heard rumors from outside that Tang He was poisoned at the time, and when he was sent to Bihai County, people were dying, but Zhou Man still saved people." "Yes," Xiao Yuanzhang said with a smile, "I did not expect that in just 5 years, Master Zhou would have achieved such success in detoxification." The emperor was very excited, but he was soon discouraged and sighed, "She is now an order from the Qingzhou Medical Department. I can't recall her to Beijing if there is nothing important." Originally, the DPRK and the CCP had a lot of opinions on his alchemy. If he knew that he had urgently ordered Zhou Man to return to Beijing for this reason, I was afraid that the opinions would be even greater. Xiao Yuan immediately took out the booklet from his sleeve and said, "Your Majesty, after 5 years of management by Lord Zhou, the Qingzhou Medical Office is now on track. Now all the medical offices are based on the experience of the Qingzhou Medical Office. The purpose of the adults being released has been achieved." Xiao Yuanzhang said, "Master Zhou has Zhenggu under his command, and he can completely take over the work of Master Zhou, but there are still some problems when local medical offices refer to the process of Qingzhou Medical Office, such as insufficient funds for local medical offices, and shortage of medicinal materials is one of them big problem. At this time, one person is needed to reconcile. I think that there is no more suitable person than Lord Zhou, who established the Qingzhou Medical Bureau. The emperor took the book, unfolded it and asked, "What is this?" This is the case for Master Zhou's proposal to create a pharmacy in order to fund the development of local medical offices. Xiao Yuanzhang sighed, this minister has lost his grace, and his medical skills are good, but in terms of the overall situation, we still have a long-term vision. I'm not as good as Lord Zhou, so I'm also constrained in the office, and I often feel that it is difficult to perform, so the minister proposes that Zhou Man be transferred back to Beijing to preside over the overall situation of the Imperial Physician Office. The emperor was surprised, you want to give Zhou Man the post of the Imperial Physician's Office? Xiao Yuanzhang choked, although he had no plans for this, but the emperor said so, he could only grit his teeth and nod, yes, the minister is willing to abdicate and become a virtuous person. Lord Zhou is more suitable for this position than the minister. No, the emperor said with a serious face, isn't that helping the seedlings? How old is Zhou Man? And the promotion of official rank is not right, the emperor said. Is the official rank of Qingzhou Medical Office the 4th rank or the 5th rank? Gu Zhong hurriedly said, Your Majesty, Qingzhou is the 5th grade. The emperor and Xiao Yuan said righteously, look, it's not suitable. Gu Zhong glanced at the monk who had been closing his eyes slightly, as if he was closing his eyes to rest in peace, and glanced at his apprentice. The little servant immediately brought up a teapot, Gu Zhong took it, smiled and stepped forward to add tea to the emperor and monk. The sound of the water brought the emperor back to his senses. He looked up and saw the monk who closed his eyes and rested. He said with a smile, Master is tired, let's play this chess here today, Gu Zhong, send the master out of the palace. Yes. The monk got up and said goodbye. After he left, the emperor turned his head and said to Xiao Yuan, do you want Zhou Man to take your hand? Xiao Yuanzhang bowed slightly and said, I think this is an accepted result. The emperor thoughtfully said, I thought that Iking and courtiers were more interested in Luo Iking. Xiao Yuanzhang said, Master Luo has a very strong ability to handle affairs, and he is indeed a rare capable minister, but he doesn't know medical skills or principles, so I'm afraid it's not right to be an order of the Imperial Physician's Office, and in terms of ability to do things, Master Zhou is still there. Above him. The emperor did not deny this, but it is not appropriate for Zhou Man to be in the position at this time. The emperor said, the time is wrong. Xiao Yuanzhang, he didn't even think about making Zhou Man the order now. You didn't mention it yourself. The two looked at each other, but didn't speak for a while. Gu Zhong walked in quietly, took the monk's tea and handed it over to his apprentice, and asked him to withdraw. He seemed to see the embarrassment between the emperor and Xiao Yuanzhang, and said with a smile, Xiao Yuanzhang, Imperial Physician Lu is not going to serve as an official. Is that right? Isn't the Imperial Physician's Office going to vacate a place? That position is, Imperial Physician Lu he. Xiao Yuanzhang saw the emperor's bright face, and he was speechless. The emperor asked, it has been decided that it is Imperial Physician Lu? Why didn't I receive the certificate? No, Xiao Yuanzhang said with a complicated heart, it's just that the minister thinks so. Many imperial physicians in the Imperial Physician Department have tacitly agreed. But this time, he was really relieved. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3251. Gu Zhong sent Xiao Yuanzhang, who was in a daze, out of the hall. Seeing that there was no one left or right, he grabbed him and asked in a low voice, now that there is no one, Xiao Yuan might as well give our family an accurate word, then Master Luo Er. Is the offering of Bulaudan real or fake? Of course, Xiao Yuanzhang wouldn't tell him directly, but looked at him meaningfully and said, Eunuch Gu, How many emperors have made alchemy to seek longevity in the past, but who has longevity? Gu Zhong lowered his voice and said, I naturally know, what I'm asking is, can the Bulao be harmful to the body? Xiao Yuanzhang fell silent. After a while, he said, it's a medicine that is 3-point poisonous, not to mention an elixir. If eunuch Gu can persuade him, he should persuade his majesty to take less. Gu Zhong was stunned and said in a low voice, please also ask the imperial physician's office to move faster. Winter is coming. If Lord Zhou doesn't enter the capital as soon as possible, it will be even more difficult to leave when the snow falls. Xiao Yuanzhen nodded. As soon as he returned to the imperial hospital, he went to see the imperial physician Lu. Seeing him sorting out his pulse cases with ease, he felt a little sullen. You are quite leisurely. Imperial physician Lu said with a smile, I'm leaving now, and the hospital is still pointing at me at this time, which is too much. Xiao Yuan was sitting opposite him, glanced at the pulse case in front of him, and asked, how many are there? Not much. Xiao Yuanzheng, how many days will it take to sort it out? Imperial physician Lu heard something wrong, raised his eyebrows and asked, why, I'm an official, and the hospital is about to kick me out of the house, and won't let me stay for a few more days. Xiao Yuanzheng waved his hand and said, you know I don't mean that. He paused and then said, just figure it out as soon as possible. Tomorrow I will decide on the candidate for Zhou Shichen, and I will have someone to deliver the official document. Delivery. Imperial Dr. Lu paused, glanced outside the door, moved closer to Xiao Yuanzheng, and asked in a low voice, isn't it Imperial Dr. Lu? No. Xiao Yuanzhen's eyes were a little vacant, and he lowered his voice slightly, in terms of merit and official rank, it should be Zhou Da's talent. Dr. Lu, isn't Master Zhou in Qingzhou? Your Majesty is going to call her back to Beijing. For a while, Imperial Physician Lu didn't know whether to be happy or sad for Imperial Physician Lu, and his heart was complicated. After all, Zhou Man not only has a better relationship with him, but the two are still in-laws. Imperial Physician Lu quickened his actions to sort out the pulse case, and whispered, it will be finished soon, I will call Imperial Physician Lu to help in a while. It was Lu Sunyang. Xiao Yuanzheng glanced at him, and felt that this old man was also a cunning man. It was originally planned to be Imperial Physician Lu, and it was always slow, but now it is faster to set Zhou Man. But he still got up and nodded, okay, just make up your mind. He said, this matter has not been written down yet, so don't spread it out. Imperial Physician Lu expressed his understanding that he would never spread the word. If the official document did not come out for a day, the matter would not be settled for a day. When Xiao Yuan was coming out, he met Imperial Physician Lu, who came in from outside with a smile on his face. He couldn't help but stop, turned around and quickly returned to his office. It's a headache. Although he never said that Tai Lu would take over Tai Lu, this was indeed recognized as the most suitable candidate before. After all, Zhou Man was not in Beijing. Oh, no, there is still competition, Lord Luo and him. Xiao Yuan was rubbing his chin and thinking. After a long time, his mind was dizzy and he didn't make up his mind. He could only shake his head and simply pick up a pen to write to Zhou Man. Let Zhou Man solve it. The next day at the Xiaoqiao meeting, Xiao Yuanzheng suggested a candidate for the Zhou office of the Imperial Physician Office. Not to mention the others, even Lord Luo, who attended the small court meeting with Xiao Yuanzheng, was stunned. Lord Luo is the right officer. Although the left and right officers have the same official rank, it is generally accepted in the official circle that the left is more noble than the right. So recently, Lord Luo has been working hard to compete with Imperial Physician Lu for the position of Zhou Shichen, and ceded the position of Yu Shichen to Imperial Physician Lu. But he didn't expect that he and Lu Tai would become like this, and it was Zhou Man who finally became Zhou Shichen. Xiao Yuanzheng listed the reasons for recommending Zhou Man, and then turned to Zhou Man's excerpt and said, the establishment of various pharmacies involves the development of local medical offices. If you are most familiar with the development of local medical offices, it is none other than Lord Zhou, so I think it is most suitable for Lord Zhou to take over the post of Zhou Shuchen. The emperor looked at the other ministers and asked, what do you think? Old Master Tang said, I think it's okay. Lu Shangshu even said, it is true that Lord Zhou is the most suitable. The other ministers had no objection, even Li Shangshu said, this minister agrees. Then he said, winter is about to begin, and it's hard to walk on snowy roads after winter. It's best to send an official document to let Zhou Man return to Beijing as soon as possible. The emperor nodded with satisfaction, then this matter is settled. So Zhou Man's promotion was passed. Lord Luo. Today's small court meeting went well, and even the ministers were in a good mood. Li Shangshu walked beside Zhao Qiuagong with his hands behind his back, and after leaving the palace, he invited him to go to the restaurant for a drink. Zhao Qiuagong looked at the time, drinking at this time? You don't go to the Yamen. The Ministry of Rights has nothing to do recently, and I went there to sit and drink tea, or else I would be surrounded by people below to tell Mingda and the Crown Princess, why don't you hide outside? Li Shangshu asked, what, is there something wrong with your Ministry of War? Zhao Qiuagong shook his head, it's okay. Let's go then. Zhao Qiuagong looked at him strangely, why are you so happy today? Zhou Man is coming back. Zhao Qiuagong was even more surprised, haven't you always disliked Zhou Man? Li Shangshu glanced at him and said, who said I can't stand her anymore? I'm just talking about things. Zhao Qiuagong asked amusingly, then why are you so happy about her coming back this time? The smile on Li Shangshu's face diminished slightly, his head turned, and he looked in one direction from a distance. Zhou Man is back, do you think that yard still exists? Zhao Qiuagong turned his head to look, it was the place where Tianzu monks made alchemy. The smile on Zhao Qiuagong's face was also faint. After a moment of silence, he said, even Xiao Yuanzheng has to retreat, so Zhou Man's words may not work. Li Shangshu shook his head, that's not necessarily true. Zhou Man's medical skills don't need to be said. She is also knowledgeable. If there is anyone in the world who can convince your majesty, except for the empress, Zhou Man is the only one. There is nothing left for the queen, and now only Zhou Man is left. Li Shangshu said, if Zhou Man is not determined to take over as Zhou's chief of the imperial physician's office, I would also like to mention to Kui Shangshu the person who asked Zhou Man to return to Beijing to report his duties at the end of the year. The Minister of Personnel was replaced by Kui Shangshu this year, and everyone seemed to be getting old and replaced by a new one. As soon as Zhou Man's official document came out of the capital, many people in the capital knew it, and of course the first to know was the Imperial Hospital and the Imperial Physician's Office. It was not until the evening that it was introduced to Huiguo Temple and Suandu Temple. In the Huiguo Temple, the increasingly old master's Hiran sighed, turned the Buddha beads and said, this is the luck of the great Jin dynasty. Jiyan asked, why did master say that? Master's Hiran shook his head and did not answer him. And in Suandu Temple, the old Taoist shook the letter in his hand hesitantly, Zhou Man is going back to Beijing, so will this letter still be delivered? See you tomorrow. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3252. After a moment of contemplation, the watcher took the letter and tore it up. Since you are coming back, you don't need to do anything more. If you don't warn in advance, if Lord Zhou doesn't know the inside story. The spectator shook his head. Alchemy for the emperor has always been a taboo, I don't believe that no one has found it wrong. Although Mr. Zhuang refused to talk about it when he came here a few times, but listening to what he meant, he also did not agree with the emperor. Taking pills. Therefore, the spectator felt that Zhou Man did not need his reminder there. In fact, at first he wanted to persuade Mr. Zhuang to persuade Zhou Man to return to Beijing, but Mr. Zhuang didn't seem to want Zhou Man to be involved in this matter, so he just didn't know what to do. No way, Guanzu wanted to write a letter to Zhou Man. They could only barely have some friendship, and they rarely exchanged letters, so it was a lot of courage for the spectator to write this letter to Zhou Man. The reason why Suan Duguan wrote to Zhou Man at this time was because someone in the court suggested that Suan Duguan and the monk Tianzu could make alchemy together. Although Guanzu himself can concoct pills and take pills, but it is for self-cultivation, cooperate with practice, in order to achieve the goal of lightheartedness, and it has nothing to do with the old pill. The most important thing is that the spectator does not feel that there is no old elixir in this world. Give the emperor medicine pills, if something goes wrong, the monk Zhu will be able to run away alone. What should he do? Suan Duguan has such a big family business, and there is an entire Taoist sect behind it. The emperor really had an accident because he took the medicine pill, and they all couldn't eat it and walked around. Zhou Man was completely unaware of the turbulent undercurrents in the capital, and was stunned when he received the official dispatch from the imperial court. Why did I get promoted when I was so good? Bai Shan. He reached out and took the official document in her hand and looked at it again, and determined that it was a dispatch official document. Could it be that your document is so well written that His Majesty and Begwan are so happy to see it that they have given you a promotion? Zhou Man flipped through the pages and asked Daji, is there only official documents? No letters. I only received the official document now, Daji said. It's urgent. The Ministry of Personnel and the Imperial Physician's Office seem to be in a hurry, urging the lady to return to Beijing. Bai Shan was a little worried. Could it be that something happened to Your Majesty or the Crown Prince? If these two things happen, the news may not be sent. Bai Shan looked at Zhou Man. Zhou Man accepted the official document and said, let someone prepare the luggage. After I hand over the medical department, I will set off for Beijing. Daji bowed and stepped back, while Zibing and Julan also went to pack their luggage. Zhou Man turned his head to look at Bai Shan. Eldest sister has to follow me back, right? Bai Shan pondered, and nodded after a while. All right, she hasn't seen her grandmother and father-in-law since she was born. This time, let her go back to Beijing with you to meet her elders. Zhou Man looked at him sympathetically. As soon as we leave, you will be left in Bihai County, and Liwei. However, Zhou Liwei's family of 3 has been living in Dajiawa, and they only go back to the county town during Chinese New Year and festivals. Bai Shan took her hand and smiled slightly. It's all right, you go back to Beijing first, half a year or 2 years later. I should also change places. Then choose a place close to the capital. The wharf has been built, and Mr. Kui is preparing to bring people from the Ministry of Industry back to Beijing. He has basically done everything he needs to do in Bihai County. Along with Zhou Man's transfer document was Zheng Gu's promotion document. He was promoted to the Qingzhou Medical Department's order to take over Zhou Man's job. Zhou Man handed over the work to him, but there was not much, because since Zheng Gu arrived in Qingzhou, Zhou Man basically took him with him in all his work. In the past 2 years, he left all the affairs of the medical department to him, and he only grasped the general direction and treating patients. So there are very few things to be handed over, and it is very smooth. Although Zheng Gu was mentally prepared, he was still very reluctant and a little sad when he came. The reason why he was sent to Qingzhou was to be Zhou Man's deputy and to take over Zhou Man in the future. His promotion meant that Zhou Man was leaving. Zhou Man thought very much, patted him on the shoulder and said, do well, let the officials in the department pass the word to the department orders of the other 2 counties, and let them wait at the Qingzhou medical office in 3 days, we will have a meeting. Zheng Gu immediately said, I will have someone go to notify the Changsha County Medical Office. Zhou Man was busy handing over the work, and the mansion was even busier. Except for Bai Shan, all of them had to move back, and they had to bring a lot of things, and the most important thing was that they also brought a lot of people. And who will stay and who will go back with them? Zheng Shi took the list to find Bai Shan. Bai Shan glanced at it and said, "Let Daji go back with you, the maids don't have to stay, just let he stay in the kitchen, and my starter and guard can take care of it." Zheng Shi said, "Daji should stay, you are used to his care." Bai Shan shook his head, "I'm the county magistrate, and there are still yamen here. It's not very useful for Daji to stay here. You can accompany her in and out when you go back with Manbao." After thinking about it for a while, the Zheng family stopped worrying. Anyway, Daji has always followed the two of them, no matter who he is with, he is used to it. Then these guards. Bai Shan then used a red pen to tick the names of a few people, and said with a smile, "They are now serving as yamen in the county, let them stay, and the rest will go back with you." Bai Shan pondered, "You have brought a lot of things back to Beijing this time, and there are old and young people. I'm really worried that Manbao won't set off with you. It's better to bring some more people. I'll go and invite a team of soldiers. Escort you back." Zheng Shi smiled and said, "Now Qiutai Minan is peaceful, and the world is bright, what can happen?" Bai Shan smiled and said, "Be prepared, and there is no shortage of money at home. It will be easier to bring some people with you, and I will feel at ease." He sighed, "It's a pity Brother Thursday hasn't come back yet, otherwise it would be better for him to follow you." Bai Shan said this for a while, thinking thoughtfully, "They will be back soon after counting the time. Mother, why don't you stay for a while longer and go together when brother comes back on Thursday?" Zheng Shi hesitated, "Would you like to discuss it with Manbao?" As soon as Zhou Man heard it, he immediately responded, "Okay, my fourth brother is more thorough with him on the road, but it will be colder by then." Bai Shan smiled and said, "It doesn't matter, just walk slowly. They are not in a hurry anyway, but have you decided when to leave?" Zhou Man nodded and said, "I originally wanted to choose a good day to leave, but the capital came to the official document to urge again, but the strange thing is that this time, except for a letter from Xiao Yuanzheng, no one else gave it to me. I wrote letters, even Mr. Zhuang did not." Zhou Man took out the letter and showed it to Bai Shan. "Xiao Yuanzhen's letter is also very serious. It just said that it was for the better development of the Imperial Physician's office. It happened that Imperial Physician Lu was going to serve, so he recommended me." Zhou Man said in a low voice, "Actually, I always thought that Imperial Physician Lu was appointed, and the person who took over should be Imperial Physician Lu. I had talked with Xiao Yuanzheng and the others. After the Qingzhou Medical Office, I have to choose another place to release it, and then I will be transferred back to Beijing depending on the situation." Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3253. Bai Shan affirmed, "Something must have happened in Beijing, and it must have something to do with His Majesty the Crown Prince, otherwise Mr. will not write a letter to us. He doesn't write, it means that he is writing to us at this time, whether it is greetings or business, it may not be good for us or the prince, so he doesn't say anything or write anything." Zhou Man muttered, "But back in the capital and living under the same roof, can those people still stare at Mr. Zhuang and not talk to me?" Bai Shan nodded her nose and smiled, "I still have to do superficial work. Okay, let's take a rest. I have to hurry up in a few days. I have to rest well these days." Bai Shan reached out and touched her belly, "This time you suffered." Zhou Man said indifferently, "Although Beijing Central urged me to return to Beijing earlier, it did not give me a time limit. I will go back in a carriage all the way, so I won't be too tired, don't worry." Bai Shan took the person into his arms and said, "When you return to the capital, write to me to report safety." Zhou Man responded, looked up at him in his arms, and smiled slightly, "I will write you a letter. When I return to Beijing, I will pick up the painting skills, and I will paint you a self-portrait after learning. If you miss me now, just look at my painting. Bai Shan couldn't help laughing. How long will it take you to learn how to draw? Why don't I paint it for you now? Bai Shan said softly. It also saves the messengers who deliver the letters, who have to send us paintings back and forth. Bai Shan did what he said, and the next day, taking advantage of the good sun, he skipped half a day of work and came back to find Zhou Man, and dragged him into the garden to paint. Zhou Man was wearing new clothes, and Julan also specially combed Zhou Man a chic hairstyle and put on several pieces of jewelry that she would not normally touch. Putting on mouth grease, Bai Shan rolled his eyes as he walked out of the house facing the sun. Seeing him staring blankly at her, Zhou Man reached out and gestured in front of him, "Go back to your senses." Bai Shan returned to his senses, his ears were a little red, he looked away involuntarily, turned back to look at her after a while, took her hand and said, "I have someone prepare a pen, ink, paper and inkstone in the garden's open hall, let's go." Zhou Man responded, and the two went to the garden holding hands. It was only a short while before Bai Shan peeked at her 7 or 8 times. Zhou Man couldn't help but reached out and touched the jewelry between his temples. "Is it crooked?" "No," Bai Shan shook his head and said, "It's beautiful." Zhou Man pondered, "Is that because I rarely dress up, so I'm dumbfounded?" Bai Shan pursed his lips and smiled, his eyes flashed with light, and nodded, "It's rare, except when we got married, and it was only when we entered the palace to attend the palace banquet during the New Year that I saw you dressed up like this, but it's still different." "What's the difference?" Bai Shan stopped, turned to look at her seriously, looked her up and down several times, then stared at her face and said, "It's just different, you'll know when I draw it." "Zhou Man, trick me." Bai Shan shook his head, "Whether you believe it or not, if you insist on what I say, it used to be a pretty, like a hibiscus that just emerged from the water, but now it's a peach blossom and jade face, shining like a spring flower." His face was as thick as Zhou Man, and he couldn't help blushing at this time, even his neck was red, he couldn't say a word, he lowered his head slightly, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but turn up. Bai Shan smiled and dragged Zhou Man to Changxian to paint. This painting, Bai Shan, was very attentive. He started to paint it when the sun was high, and slowly into the evening. Bai Jingxing's children searched for them all over the house. When he finally found them, his father ignored her. She could only rely on her mother, but only he couldn't help but look up at her with his little head raised. Zhou Man picked her up and sat on his lap, smiled and asked, "What are you looking at?" Bai Jingxing hugged her neck and looked at her seriously, "Mother, you are so beautiful." Zhou Man's eyes glowed, and he whispered, "I will wear it for you to see if it looks good." The children of Bai Jingxing nodded again and again. Bai Shan, who was painting on the side, frowned and said to Zhou Man, "It takes a long time to change clothes and get dressed. She's naughty, and it's hard to take her with her, so forget it." Zhou Man pursed his lips and smiled, "Then when you return to Beijing, you can bring it with you and dress up." Bai Shan smiled, nodded, and said, "Yes, I'm not afraid of her being naughty when I bring her." Bai Jingxing looked at her father and then at her mother, and immediately complained, "I'm not naughty, I'm very good." No one will believe this, even Bai Shan, who loves his daughter, can't be ignorant of his conscience. Bai Shan finished adding the painting, looked at the person with bright eyes and white teeth in the painting, and couldn't help looking up at Zhou Man with a smile, "Do you look like it?" Zhou Man looked at himself in the painting, a little disbelieving, "This is me." Bai Shan turned his head and commanded, "Go and bring the bronze mirror, and let your lady take a good look at yourself." In May, they didn't move at all, and exclaimed around the painting, "It really seems like, lady, this is you." This provoked Zhou Man to go back and stare at himself in the bronze mirror, looking at him again and again. Bai Shan, who had already washed up, passed behind her in his underwear. Hearing the words, He stopped and turned around to straighten her head. I'll remove your hair, and you've been watching it for half an hour. It's pretty. Bai Shan couldn't help laughing. It's beautiful. Seeing that she liked it so much, Bai Shan simply painted another painting for the next 2 days. One of the pictures is what she looks like now. After drawing it, give it to her. Take it back to the capital and find someone to frame it. If you are in a bad mood in the future, take a look. Zhou Man took it in confusion. I look at my own paintings. Yes, you must be in a good mood when you see yourself so good looking. Zhou Manluo came in and felt that what he said was very reasonable, so he put the painting away. Another painting is Zhou Man from a few years ago that Bai Shan painted from memory. It is a winter painting. She was carrying a medicine box and came back from outside in the snow. She was still wearing a red cloak. Smile, starlight in eyes. Not as stunning as yesterday's painting, but a playful and quiet feeling lingers. Zhou Man liked the painting very much and asked, "When was this me?" Bai Shan smiled and said, "When you were 16, you went to Zhao Kuogong's mansion for an outpatient clinic. When you came back, Bai Er and I were building snowmen in the yard." "Zhou Man, why don't I remember?" "How can you remember a very ordinary time?" Bai Shan said with a smile. "If you had to remember all these, how much stuff would you have to hold in your mind?" "Zhou Man, then how do you remember?" Bai Shan stared at her and said, "Because you were so beautiful when you walked in, I remembered it right away, and I can't forget it." Zhou Man lowered his head. His face was a little red, and after a while he raised his head not to be outdone, and reached out to touch his forehead. "What happened to you recently? Why do you always say such things?" Bai Shan asked without changing his face. "Don't you like it?" The corners of Zhou Man's mouth couldn't help curling up, and he whispered, "I still like it very much, but don't keep saying it, I'll be ashamed." "Bai Shan, this is very rare." The good atmosphere soon dissipated. Zhou Man lifted his foot and stepped on his foot and crushed him. Bai Shan immediately apologized, "Madam, I was wrong." He just got used to it and didn't stop. "Too sleepy today, there are only 2 updates, the remaining one will be made up tomorrow, I will try to update as soon as possible." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3254. Zhou Man returned to Beijing with only 1 car and 5 rides, and Zheng Shi and Xiao Qian took Bai Jingxin to the county town to wait for Zhou Man to return. Bai Shan sent people out of the city, glanced at the lively official road, and told her, "Be careful when you return to Beijing. Now that we are older, we will no longer be treated as childish words when we talk and do things." Zhou Man nodded and said, "I know, don't worry." Bai Shan sent Zhou Man into the car and nodded to Daji who was driving. Zhou Man opened the curtain and waved to him, "Okay, go back quickly." Said to let Bai Shan go back, but she kept looking out. Zibing knocked on the wall of the car, and after letting Daji drive, poured a cup of tea for Zhou Man. "Madam, do you want to drink tea to moisten your mouth?" Zhou Man glanced back and looked back. "What kind of tea is this?" "Almond brown sugar tea." "What a chic tea," Zhou Man stared. "Why haven't I heard of it?" "Oh, the lady heard from the master that it is good for pregnant women to eat almonds, so the lady asked someone to grind the almonds to make tea, and the eldest lady said it was not good, so she added brown sugar. Lady, try it. Look." Zhou Man took a sip, his eyes lit up, and he took 2 sips and said, "Don't say it, it's pretty good." Zhou Man's journey was not slow, but it wasn't particularly fast. Daji had been controlling the itinerary so that he could find a place to sleep every time he stopped, and returned to the capital on the 9th day. 2 days slower than riding a horse. But people in the capital don't know. According to the old example, the normal handover of officials, plus family leave, etc., are counted together. As long as there is no need for expedited position changes, each official has 1 month. Therefore, although Zhou Man's arrival time is not too early, it is not too late. The courtiers who did not know that Zhou Man completed all the handovers in just 5 days were satisfied with Zhou Man's speed. When officials enter Beijing to report their duties, they must report to the Ministry of Officials as soon as they enter Beijing. Zhou Man was the same. While she asked the guards to take her documents to the official department to line up to report, she thought about going home to freshen up and change clothes first, and the palace might summon her later. As a result, the guard with the paperwork left, and before she could return to Chongyuan Square, the servants and guards in the palace quickly chased after her. "Master Zhou, stay." The carriage stopped. Zhou Man lifted the curtain and looked at the person who came. "This is you." The inner servant held an iron decree and said, "The Empress has a purpose, Xian's Human will see her." Zhou Man couldn't help but glance at Daji, and after thinking for a while, he nodded. "Let's go to the palace. Daji, you go back to the mansion to report safety and let them know that I'm back." "Yes." Dagil jumps out of the carriage and lets the other guard drive the car. The servants and the imperial army escorted the carriage forward, and Daji immediately mounted the horse after seeing the carriage leave, and took the rest back to Kongai Yuanfeng. Zhou Man helped Xibing's man to get out of the car, and looked up at the entrance of the palace. It had been 3 years since she left last time, and the entrance of the Taiji Palace had not changed at all, except for the guards guarding the entrance of the palace. Zhou Man turned his head to the cake in the car and said, "You all go back first, you don't have to wait here. The cake and the guards should come down." Zhou Man followed the servant into the palace, but instead of going to the harem, he went to the front hall of Taiji Hall. Zhou Man couldn't help but take 2 steps to catch up with the inner servant who was leading the way, and asked in a low voice, "What's the name of your lord?" The servant bowed his head and said, "I don't dare to be called that as an adult, the servant is called Follett." Zhou Man boasted, "Good name, I have never seen Lord Follett in front of the Niang before. Did the Lord Follett only come to the Niang in the past 2 years?" Fu Lai laughed softly. "The servant used to be the servant of the Taiji temple, but because the servant's name is good, His Majesty gave the servant to the Empress." Zhou Man nodded and asked, "The Empress is in the front hall at this time?" Fu Lai shook his head and said, "This is the time when the courtiers are discussing matters. Why is the Empress in the front hall?" "Zhou Man, didn't you say that the Empress summoned ministers to see her?" Fu Lai raised his face slightly, glanced at Zhou Man and then whispered, "Your Excellency is returning to Beijing to report on his work, shouldn't he come to see His Majesty?" "Zhou Man. Something must have happened in the palace, no, something must have happened in the court, otherwise the Queen would not have interfered in the affairs of the courtiers." Zhou Man lowered his voice and asked, "Lord Follett, what happened to the DPRK?" "It's nothing, Lord Zhou, don't worry too much," Fu Lai said softly after a pause, "but this time should be about to have lunch. Recently, His Majesty has a good appetite and always likes to leave the ministers in the palace to eat together. Next day, today is the day that Master Luo will present the medicinal pills. After lunch, Master Luo will serve His Majesty and take the pills. He will meditate for a while in the afternoon, so Lord Zhou should hurry up, or wait for His Majesty. I'm going to have lunch, I'm afraid I won't be in time for my job today." The maids in the palace are all very shrewd. Even if Zhou Man is well liked, it is rare to find out so many lines of information at once. When they don't give money, they jump out word by word. When they give money, they jump out word by word, and they refuse to say a single word of extra words. With such a long sentence, Zhou Man felt that it was not Follett who wanted to tell her, but the Empress behind him. Zhou Man followed Follett to the Taiji temple, while thinking wildly, "But what is the medicine pill, and who is the master?" Zhou Man asked, Then why is Master Luo not from the Central Plains? Fu Lai whispered, Na Luo Saha, from Tianzhu, returned to Beijing with Lord Wang a few years ago. Which Lord Wang? The newly appointed Kaisan doctor, Lord Wang, was envoy to Tianzhu before and was robbed by Zongtianzhu. Then he and Tubo and Nibra borrowed troops to destroy Zongtianzhu. Last year, he escorted the Zongtianzhu king and dignitaries back to Beijing to offer prisoners. Have you heard of it? Zhou Man suddenly realized, nodded again and again, I heard of it, and it is very famous. Last year, Bai Erlang, who was the favorite of the storyteller in Bihai County's tea house and restaurant, was so attracted that he left government affairs and ran to listen to it every day, but was cut down by Bai Shan and Yin Or together. He also brought back a master. Zhou Man asked, Tianzhu, wouldn't he be a Taoist priest? No, Fule's voice became even lower, and he looked around and said inaudibly, it's a monk. Zhou Man, monks also concoct alchemy. Fu Lai has never been out of the palace. The words he is going to say today are all taught by someone, so he doesn't know. Don't monks make alchemy? I haven't studied this seriously. I'll go back to Hyogyo Temple and ask Masters Hiran. Maybe it's a school of Buddhism. There are many schools of Taoism and Buddhism. Zhou Man brought back the topic. And asked, so the mother-in-law asked me to see the medicinal pills. Fu Lai smiled and said, this slave doesn't know. So much has been said, you can handle it yourself. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3255. At this time, Zhou Man didn't take medicine pills and Master Na Luo are very much in her heart. For medicine pills, she knew that not only did they practice in Suan but she also often watched Shaoqing Guanzu and them in her hometown. Alchemy, I have personally practiced it myself. In fact, it is similar to the pills they make. There are some more precious medicinal herbs that need to be added with dancha, but that stuff is too expensive. Zhou Man only watched the Taoist priests practice it twice, once by the master of Shaoqingguan, and once by the master of Suandiguan. The other medicinal herbs are actually similar to what Zhou Man and the others usually do. Therefore, Zhou Man felt that looking at medicine pills was also a very serious thing. It could be regarded as her own job as an imperial physician. Until she heard the name of the pill. Fu Lai sent Zhou Man to the Taiji temple and resigned respectfully, leaving Zhou Man to deal with it himself. Zhou Man looked down at his casual clothes and shoes, touched his hair again, and finally sighed, forget it, it's pretty neat anyway. The emperor saw that she went to the palace to report her duties as soon as she entered Beijing, so she shouldn't be treated for her disobedience. Sin. Zhou Man and the guard guarding the door cupped their hands and said, please let me know and say that the Qingzhou medical department has ordered Zhou Man to see His Majesty. The guard was still an acquaintance, so he glanced at her and turned to go in. After a while, Gu Zhong came out to invite her with a smile, and when he went out, he saw Zhou Man dressed in plain clothes with plain clothes, only a beaded flower and a wooden hairpin on his head, and stopped, here, Lord Zhou, why don't you wear official uniforms? Zhou Man spread his hands and said, what can I do? I only entered the capital. Oh, I missed your Majesty very much as soon as I entered the capital, and I have a lot of things to say to Majesty, so I can't wait to go home to wash up and go to the palace. Lord Gu, is your Majesty free to listen to my debriefing now? Come in. Hearing this, Gu Zhong swallowed the words that had just reached his mouth, immediately stepped aside, and bowed respectfully to the prince who had been standing behind him at some point in time. The crown prince glanced at Zhou Man in disgust, and said to Gu Zhong, go and prepare lunch, and the royal father wants to invite the courtiers to have a meal together. Yes, Gu Zhong glanced at Zhou Man quietly, and made a wink in the direction of the prince. Zhou Man understood and immediately followed the prince's footsteps and hugged his thigh tightly. Entering the main hall, the discussion has come to an end temporarily, and the emperor is sitting on the dragon chair and talking to all the ministers. In fact, there were not many ministers. Zhou Man glanced at them, most of them were familiar faces, only about a dozen or so. Zhou Man glanced at it, walked to the center of the hall, and knelt down to salute. The emperor's eyes were not very good, and he squinted at her for a while before saying, "Zhou Man, why haven't you seen her for 2 or 3 years, so you're so clean? You've endured hardship in Qingzhou." Zhou Man knew what the emperor liked, so he liked bright colors, especially gorgeous and luxurious ones. In the past, when Zhou Man was in the palace, most of them wore official uniforms. When he was not wearing official uniforms, his casual clothes were mainly bright colors. There were very few gray ones like today, especially when there were no decent ornaments on their heads. But, whoever rides in a carriage and dresses up specially, sleeps on the back in the carriage, sleeps on the back, of course, the less jewelry on the head, the better. As for clothes, when going out, even if it is a carriage, the dust is still there. Of course, it is mainly the clothes that are resistant to dirt. She can wear it comfortably inside, but can you tell the emperor for these reasons? Zhou Man stood up and said with a serious and respectful face, "Go back to your majesty, the minister did not suffer much in Qingzhou. The reason why you see the minister has been reduced is because you haven't seen the minister for too long. Do you miss the minister? Actually, this minister also misses his majesty, so as soon as I entered the capital, I thought of going to the palace to meet his majesty, so that I didn't have time to wash and change clothes. Please forgive me for my misdemeanor." The emperor was happy to hear it, and before she could fully kneel, he waved, "It's not a big deal, why is I so stingy? Get up quickly." The emperor also sighed, "I miss Zhou Qing very much too." The ministers had long been accustomed to the emperor's occasional sweet words, but what they were not used to was Zhou Man's sweet words. He couldn't help but raised his head and stared at her, making sure that he was really Zhou Man standing in the middle of the hall before he looked away. It turned out to be a touchstone. It's only been out for a few years, and when I came back, I became glib. The emperor was very happy to see Zhou Man, so he asked people to buy a seat for her under Xiao Yuan Zheng, and said to the left and right, "Today, Master Zhou is returning to Beijing, we will not eat in this hall, go, let Gu Zhong put lunch in the garden." The emperor said with a smile, "Zhou Iking hasn't returned to the capital for a long time. I'm afraid that he will forget the scenery of the capital. Today we will eat in the garden and enjoy the scenery." He said again, "Go and invite Master Na Luo Er, Zhou Man, Master Na Luo Er also has a good medicine skill. If you communicate with each other, maybe you will gain something in medical skills." Zhou Man likes to exchange medical skills with people the most, especially since she is a foreigner, so she can get to know the medical level of foreign countries, so she nodded happily and assured, "Don't worry, Your Majesty, I will definitely study and communicate with Master Narrower." The emperor nodded with satisfaction, but all the ministers were choked by the tea and saliva, learning to communicate. They asked her to come back to deal with Narrow, not to make them a gang. Some ministers looked at Zhou Man with horror. Could it be that Zhou Man not only learned to be slick, but also learned to be a minister after 5 years? But when she went back to Beijing 3 years ago, it seemed quite normal. The prince glanced at the ministers, looked away, too lazy to look at them, a bunch of cowards. Even persuading his father to take a medicine pill would have to be afraid of wolves and tigers. When he spoke, he had already thrown all his father's medicinal pills into the water. The place for lunch was moved to a bright garden, and it was pretty bright. Although it was winter, there were still green trees and flowers in the garden, chrysanthemums. But it's also pretty good, and the main thing is that the light is good. Sitting in the open hall, the seat was rearranged, and Zhou Man sat under the prince, diagonally opposite old Tang, and was super close to the emperor, so close that the emperor could finally see her face clearly. He couldn't help but nodded with a smile. said, "Sure enough, he has grown up." The emperor sat down on the main seat and said to her, "Okay, let's talk while we eat. If you want to report your work, you can talk about it here." She thought about the debriefing report on the way back, and she wrote all the explanations, so she didn't have to think about it, she just said it. The emperor and all the ministers accompany her to have lunch, not to mention, this meal is quite delicious, and after eating, there are a lot of things in my mind. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3256. The emperor and all the ministers were very satisfied with Zhou Man's work in Qingzhou in the past 5 years, and they had no problem with Zhou Man's entry into the imperial physician's office, but Li Shangshu said, "Your Majesty, Master Zhou is extremely skilled in medicine. If you only serve in the imperial physician's office, it will be in vain. Will the imperial physician also restore her original position?" The emperor nodded and said to Xiao Yuanzheng and the official ministry, "Let's restore the position of imperial physician of the 4th rank of Zhou Man." Xiao Yuanzheng and Kui Shangshu responded respectfully with a yes, and no one had any opinions on this. After all, her medical skills were there, and if she didn't go to the Thai hospital, they would still have opinions. Zhou Man got up and thanked him, then the emperor and the ministers talked. Zhou Man immediately bowed his head to eat. She was starving. "I didn't eat much for breakfast on the road, and after I entered Beijing, I had to struggle with this meal." Zhou Man lowered his head and ate quickly and quietly, listening to the emperor and the others talking about the establishment of pharmacies based on her debriefing report just now. There are people who oppose it, but there are more people who do not object or agree. They directly ask various questions, and Zhou Man knows that they are inclined to agree, as long as these problems are solved. While eating, I listened to it with gusto when I heard the servant report, "Your Majesty, Master Luoer is here." The emperor was refreshed, and immediately said, "Quickly please." A maid came up and took down the food box. Zhou Man dug out a large spoonful of rice and gravy, mixed it, and stuffed it into his mouth. He took out a handkerchief to cover his mouth and chewed it, turning his head to look where he came from. I saw a servant lead an exotic old monk with white eyebrows and white hair, followed by 2 monks, one of which was holding a tray. The little maid removed the food box in front of Zhou Man, and immediately a palace maid added a plate of fruit and snacks for her, and when she saw her, she whispered, "It was ordered by His Highness." Zhou Man turned his head to look at the prince, who looked up. The prince glanced at her with disgust, and then motioned her to see the old monk. Zhou Mangkong turned his eyes to the prince, and then he looked at the 3 monks who came. Na Luoer folded his hands together, bowed slightly, and bowed to the emperor, and said in Zhongyuan dialect with a strong accent, "Respected Your Majesty, this pot of medicinal pills has been refined very well. There are 3 medicinal pills in total. For His Majesty to consume for a month." "Oh," the emperor sat up straighter and said enthusiastically, "Bring it to me to see." Zhou Man swallowed all the food in his mouth slowly, and took the tea slowly, but his eyes were fixed on the tray in the monk's hand. "Not to mention that their doctors are making pills, even in other Taoist temples, there will be no less than 10 pills in one pot, right? Otherwise, isn't it a waste of medicinal materials?" Gu Zhong offered the tray and opened the box to show the emperor. There were 3 round black-red medicinal pills in the box. Zhou Man's eyes were good. At first glance, through the sunlight, the medicinal pills seemed to glow with golden light. The emperor also saw it and felt that this medicinal pill looked very high, so he picked up one and looked at it carefully, and praised, "It is indeed better than the previous one." The prince was speechless. This is medicine, not clothes, can it be based on appearance? He glanced at Zhou Man, who had an enthusiastic expression on his face, and knew that she probably didn't know anything at the moment. Seeing that the emperor had taken the tea, he quickly said, "Father, since this blonde pill is so rare, why don't you let Zhou Man know?" Zhou Man choked, the tea in his mouth spurted out at once, and then coughed violently. The ministers were not surprised, and looked at her silently. Zhou Man hurriedly wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, and looked at the emperor in shock, the medicinal pill in his hand. "Your Highness said, what is this medicine called?" No need for the prince to say. Li Shangju, who had long been disgusted with this monk, took the initiative to say, "Bu Lao Dan, it is said that it is the magic medicine of Tianzu, and eating it can make people immortal." Zhou Man was speechless and looked at the emperor. "Your Majesty, do you believe it?" All the ministers immediately lowered their heads and did not dare to look at the emperor. Except for Duke Wei in his early years, Zhou Man dared to blurt out these words. After Zhou Man finished speaking, she also felt that her words were not good and too upright. She warned herself in her heart that she had to remember Bai Shan's words and be careful. But she still couldn't help staring at the emperor, and asked in a different tone, "Do you believe it, Your Majesty?" The emperor seemed to sense her efforts, glanced at her and didn't get angry, but put the medicine pill into the box and said, "I don't expect immortality, but I just want to prolong my life and live a few more years." He smiled at Narrow Er, who was standing in the middle. "If I can live to half the age of the master, I will be satisfied." Zhou Man looked at Luo Er's face, then looked at his figure, and asked hesitantly, "Dare to ask this, Master Gajan?" Luo Er also noticed Zhou Man early. He glanced at her position to know that her status was not low, otherwise she would not be able to sit under the prince. Luo Er thought of the title the prince called her just now, and his heart moved. It was rumored that there was a female official in Dajin. She had a high status and was very favored by the emperor and the prince. Moreover, she was good at medicine. Luo Er smiled slightly and said kindly, "It's been too long, I don't even remember how old I am." The monk behind him immediately said, "The existing record is that it is 200 years old, but the exact number is 200 years old. The master can't remember it clearly. Only 200 years ago can be found in the records, so it can only be calculated as 200 years old." H. Zhou Man was amazed, his eyes lit up when he looked at Luo Er, really alive 200 years old. People in Mr. Mo's era had a normal life expectancy of 200 or 300 years old. She didn't expect that they could have it in this era. Does that mean that life really has something in common? Even if they are far behind, they can still achieve it with conditions. You don't have to change your genes like Mr. Mo and the others did at the beginning of the change. You must know that the biggest trouble for Mr. Mo and the others now is the sequelae left by their ancestors after changing their genes. Of course, no one explained to her that there was no such knowledge in the encyclopedia, but she was not stupid. After having known Mr. Mo for so many years, Keek had leaked some vague words, and she had guessed it long ago. Zhou Man stared at Master Luo Er at this time as if looking at a treasure. She immediately wiped her hands, tidied up her clothes, and went out to give him a deep bow. "Master, Zhou Man in Zaitai Hospital, there is a little research in the field of life. Of course, my knowledge is only insignificant, far less advanced than yours. I wonder if I can ask you a thing or two." The ministers widened their eyes and looked at Zhou Man in disbelief. "Zhou Man, do you actually believe what he said is true?" The ministers wanted to shake her head to wake her up. Luo Er glanced at Zhou Man and refused directly. He said to the emperor, "Your Majesty, this alchemy technique is a secret that I don't know about in Tianzu, not to mention outsiders, even the monks in our Tianzu Buddhist temple can't learn it. When it arrives, it must be a successor from Tianzu's national teacher." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3257. All the ministers became quiet and calm. The old monk didn't even know what to say, and even refused Zhou Man's communication, which made him even more suspicious. Zhou Man hurriedly said, "Master misunderstood, I don't want to learn your alchemy technique, I'm just interested in life, we can exchange our understanding of this aspect." Seeing that Na Luo Er didn't speak, Zhou Man thought he didn't understand the Central Plains dialect well, so he went into more detail and said slowly, word by word, for example, the aging of the body is the main reason for the passing of life, how can we slow it down? What about the aging of the body? In terms of diet, is it better to eat more vegetarian food, or to eat more meat, or to combine meat and vegetarian food, and if so, what proportion should be the best? Is the collocation regular and applicable to everyone, or it is different for everyone, or it can be divided into several categories, and each category is different? In daily life, is it better to be fast or slow, how fast is fast, and how slow is slow? Now Mr. Mo is doing life science research, and subdivided into genes and cells. There are all kinds of nouns that Zhou Man doesn't quite understand. But there is such a teacher, Zhou Man also has some understanding and dabbling in this. Mr. Mo called it the science of life, but Zhou Man called it the way of health preservation. That's right, in Zhou Man's view, the research Mr. Mo has done is for a healthy longevity. Isn't this the way to keep healthy? Zhou Man, who has done extensive research, can say that he went on 3 days and 3 nights without rest. This is still from the most basic diet and daily life. In addition to diet and daily life, there are various medicinal herbs to help. Mr. Mo and the others are based on refining genes. From the perspective of Zhou Man, it is not just refining medicinal materials, but it is similar to concocting alchemy and drinking medicine. So Zhou Man asked about the herbs he thought could be used. Zhou Man's mouth was dry, the emperor and all the ministers were stunned, but Na Luo Er stood calmly without saying a word. Zhou Man thought he was afraid that she would plagiarize his knowledge, and immediately said in a hoarse voice, "Master, don't worry, it is communication, naturally you will not be the only one to say that I also have research on plants that are beneficial to longevity. There are also several options here, such as..." Zhou Man said, blah blah blah, all the entries she had collected over the years from the various plants she had collected over the years, among which she had studied several plants with specific effects. For example, the fruit of a tree is considered useless by people of their age, neither can be eaten nor used as medicine, but the entry in the encyclopedia says that after extraction, a certain element in it can treat a series of terminal illnesses such as lumps, and can extend your life. The courtiers became dissatisfied. Zhou Mandu said so much, but the old monk still refused to communicate, not even a word. Where is Zhou Man plagiarizing him? Clearly he was prostituting Zhou Man for nothing. The emperor also frowned slightly, and glanced at Master Na Luo Er suspiciously. Gu Zhong has been paying attention to the emperor's expression. Upon seeing this, he stepped forward and poured a cup of tea for the emperor, and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, listen, Lord Zhou is really addicted to medical skills." Dumb. The emperor interrupted Zhou Man's continuous talk, and pointed to the tea ceremony. "Zhou Qing, there is no hurry to communicate with Master Na Luo Er, you can talk about it later, just drink some tea before you enter the capital. I made my voice hoarse on the first day, and when I look back, Mingda will embarrass me." Gu Zhong immediately brought tea to Zhou Man. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Zhou Man took the teacup and drank it, looking at Master Na Luo Er. She had recovered from the surprise at this moment, and felt that this master was probably a liar, but she still refused to give up. "I don't know where the master is cleaning? Can I talk to you when I have time?" Only then did Master Luo Er open his mouth, and said to Zhou Man with an apologetic face, "Very welcome, this noble lady, you spoke too fast just now, I didn't speak well in Zhongyuan, and I couldn't hear what you said just now." Clear. When Zhou Man heard this, hope rekindled in his eyes, and immediately said in the language of the western regions she mastered, Then do you understand Jao Kang's language? Or from Lop Nor? I will also have some. It's okay, we can't understand the language. Find Kuazajian and Honglu Temple. She said this in Jao Kang dialect, and several adults in Changxian understood it, and Lord Tang was one of them, and smiled slightly. Master Zhou, don't worry, it happens that Lord Wang is still in Beijing at this time. If you need to translate, let him translate for him. Zhou Man's heart moved. Is it Lord Wang who invited the master to come? Old Master Tang nodded slightly. Yes, it is this Master Wang. Zhou Menyi put his palms together and said happily, okay. The ministers looked at the ambitious, bright-eyed Zhou Man and nodded slightly, and were also very happy. Sure enough, Zhou Man still had to come forward to cure the master. Although they didn't understand the second half of Zhou Man's words, they sounded very profound, as long as she was not simply blinded by others. Many ministers glanced at Master Luo who was standing with his eyes down and smiling. Humph, who would spread his wisdom everywhere as soon as he entered Beijing, learned Jin dialect after just listening to it once, and said that all the languages in the world are the same, as long as they are spoken through the mouth, they all have something in common, and he lives well. After a long time, I have traveled a lot, and I have already mastered this commonality. Many languages can be remembered after listening to them once. Can't remember right now? The emperor didn't think of this at this time. He simply felt that Zhou Man was at a disadvantage. He said that it was exchange and learning. Zhou Man, blah, 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 blah. A long time. As a result, Master Luo didn't say a word. Bai Kong Zhou Man listened to so many things. Sure enough, the small country of Fanbang is stingy and does not have the tolerance of their big country. Because of this, the emperor was less enthusiastic about the newly refined and beautiful golden elixir, so he was not in a hurry to take it, and waved at Zhou Man. Since Zhou Qing is also interested in immortality, why don't you come and see my work? Buletin Laudan. Zhou Man went up to look and corrected, Your Majesty, I'm not interested in immortality, although I think people can live a long and healthy life, and can live for hundreds of years, but I don't think immortality is possible. I prefer to call it the way of life. Zhou Man took the box and did not forget to find evidence for himself. For example, this Master Luo he is 200 years old now, but he is also old and kind, and he is not old. The ministers couldn't help nodding together. Although they didn't think the old monk was 200 years old, they agreed with her second half sentence, so they echoed, it is extremely. Since Duke Wei left, they no longer have anyone who can agree with them like this, so many words are hard to open in their hearts. Finally got it out today. Good night. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3258. Zhou Man looked around the medicine pill, smelled it again, and frowned slightly. Can your majesty give this medicine pill to me to study? This. The emperor couldn't help looking at Na Luo and asked Zhou Man, is there any problem with this medicine? Zhou Man smiled and said, Your Majesty, the medicines you take must be checked by the Taiyuan hospital. I see that there are several unidentified medicines in this medicine pill, and the medicines contained in them are too heavy, so I want to check them carefully. Sometime. The emperor said, isn't cinnabar a valuable thing? Cinnabar is a valuable thing, but it is also poisonous. It can save people, and it can also harm people. If the amount is too large, the damage to the body will be extremely serious, so the minister needs to check. Na Luo who had been silent for a long time, suddenly said, I didn't put cinnabar. The monks who prepared the medicinal materials in Changsheng Temple knew this. He said, using dancha to make medicinal pills is the tradition of Dajin Taoism, we don't have it. Zhou Man squeezed the medicinal pill in his hand and smiled, I can guarantee that there must be some cinnabar in it. Luo Er didn't expect Zhou Man's words to be so full and strong, which was different from the officials he had come into contact with during this time. Of course he could feel the unwelcome of the Grand Jin officials, but no matter how much they hated him, they were respectful and smiling when they communicated with him. Said the medicine was not good. Zhou Man looked at the medicinal herbs again, scratched his fingernails gently, and affirmed again, there must be dancha. In addition to dancha, there are other things, similar to dancha. There are several medicines among them, I can't tell the difference. Come out. Na Luo Er said, Your Majesty has been taking my medicinal pills for more than 4 months, and I have never had any problems. During this time, I have even been in good spirits. Zhou Man looked at the emperor and said solemnly, Your Majesty, I want to ask you for a pulse. The ministers and the emperor had long been accustomed to her outspokenness, but Na Luo Er, who had always been calm, couldn't help but turn black, feeling that Zhou Man's words were simply hitting him in the face in front of everyone. The emperor glanced at the medicine pill in Zhou Man's hand, and still rolled up his sleeves and said with a smile, Okay, you can show it to me. Zhou Man covered the box, handed it over to Guzhong, and stepped forward to give the emperor a pulse. Na Luo Er's face was a little dark, and he said to the emperor solemnly, If the emperor can't trust me, please let me leave Dajin and go back to my hometown. This is the magic of our country. If it weren't for the emperor, you had the fortune of being the master of the world. With great merit, I will not give you the refined medicinal herbs to eat. Zhou Man took the emperor's hand and put it on the case aside. She knelt down on one knee to check the pulse, and couldn't help but muttered, Is this a monk or a Taoist priest? It's luck, and it's merit. Because he was close to her, the emperor who just listened to the whole thing. Zhou Man felt the emperor's pulse, and the pulse was barely okay, except that it was a little more dry than 3 years ago, but a person's pulse can be different every day. This change was within the normal range. Zhou Man breathed a sigh of relief, and was about to withdraw his fingers when suddenly a slight stagnation seemed to be captured in his heart. Zhou Man paused, and then pressed his slightly raised fingers again. Familiar with Zhou Man's pulse, the emperor who was about to withdraw his hand also paused, his body stiffened slightly, he raised his head and said with a smile to Na Luo Er, Master misunderstood, Master Zhou's pulse at this time is not a medicinal pill to doubt you, instead, she and Xiao Yuan have always been looking at Zhen's body, and when we meet again after a long absence, she naturally wants to take a look for me. Zhou Man couldn't hear anyone talking, his eyes were slightly closed, and he immersed himself in the pulse he heard under his finger belly. But every once in a while, the strong pulse will stagnate slightly quietly, the time is very short, just like that, and the pulse will return to normal immediately after a while. If you don't pay attention, it is easy to miss the past. Zhou Man pressed the emperor's pulse under his fingertips, and the fingers of his left hand gently tapped the pulse he heard on his thigh. The open house slowly became quiet, and they all looked at Zhou Man. Did she listen to the pulse for too long this time? It's been almost a quarter of an hour, right? When did it take so long for imperial physicians to diagnose the pulse? The prince couldn't help sitting up straight, frowning at Zhou Man. Zhou Man opened his eyes after confirming, and couldn't help but look up at the emperor. He saw that the emperor was also looking at her, with a smile on his face, but there was not much smile in his eyes. In front of the ministers, the emperor couldn't say anything to her. He just glanced at the ministers who had already stood up and gave Zhou Man a wink. Zhou Man withdrew his hand and said solemnly, Your Majesty, it is not suitable for you to take medicinal pills today. Oh, the emperor asked coldly, why is this? Because you're angry, this medicinal pill is a big boost. If you eat it again, I'm afraid it will get even more angry, Zhou Man said, you have to adjust your body first, and then eat it if you don't get angry. Na Luo Er said, the interval between taking medicinal pills can't be too long, Otherwise all the medicinal pills taken earlier will be wasted. He bent slightly and said, Your Majesty, although you are rich, the magic medicine is a gift from God, and I don't bring much, so if the time interval between taking it is too long, all the effects of the previous medicine will pass, and you will get angry and lose your temper. Not serious. How could it not be a severe one? Joe Man had a serious look on his face to diagnose the disease with him. A minor illness can also turn into a fatal terminal illness. This body gets angry, and when the seasons change in autumn and winter, it is like a spark in the wilderness. Although it is small, it is inconspicuous in the wide wilderness, but if that spark is not extinguished, it will add hay and dry wood to it. It will burst into flames, and then it will start a prairie fire. Joe Man got up, took 2 steps back, knelt down, and said with a sincere expression, Your Majesty, you can't underestimate this anger. Ah, it's dangerous. Ministers. Although she explained it in an easy-to-understand manner, they also felt that what she said was reasonable, but for some reason, in line with her current tone and attitude, everyone felt that she was deliberately embarrassing Na and deliberately prevented the emperor from taking the medicine pill at this time. It seems that the thirst for knowledge just now was fake. Is it really full now? The ministers were also confused. Both of them were so similar to her nature that the big guy couldn't tell which one was the real her. Alas, I didn't expect Joe Man to be out for 5 years, and it turned out to be like this when he came back. It's still easy to understand the simple Joe Man before. The emperor favored Zhuman as always, smiled and waved, since it is not appropriate to take it at this time, then put away the medicine pill first, and then eat it after the body is recuperated. He smiled and explained to Na, Master, relax, Master Joe is not targeting you, but she has always been serious about my health. The emperor said that Joe Man was not targeting him, but Na and most of the people present felt that Joe Man was deliberately targeting him.